you guys a question, and let me know in the comments. If there was one monster that you would like to see in the Monsterverse, which kaiju would it be? Well, for me personally, he's in this video. Today, we are gonna see what would it look like or what would happen if Destoroyah was in the Monsterverse. I'm sure we're all thinking the same. We all hope he's actually in there one day, but let's see what happens here. Shout out to Goji Center.
If there is
and let's
one
get to it.
Monster in
See,
all
we've
of
seen Destoroyah before, but
real challenge for Godzilla,
not
a creature
in
with weapons
recent
that are
movies.
difficult to counter, size that will make Godzilla
it was a long time
look
ago.
small, and an evil personality.
I mean, he even looks sick
one,
in the old movie.
Destoroyah. Today on Goji Center, we'll
I'm
provide
hyped.
an answer to a question everyone's been wondering about. What if Destoroyah made his debut
Bro,
in the
Destoroyah would look
Monsterverse?
so sick
Will he look
in
similar?
this day and age of
How does the
CGI.
Monsterverse timeline set up the
Oh, what's that
return
right
of this
one?
kaiju? And finally, will this creature be more powerful than
Bro,
Godzilla?
that would be
Stay until the
crazy.
end to find out. Before we start talking
If you guys
about the
haven't,
Monsterverse
scroll down,
at
hit that
all,
subscribe button
let's do
for
a
me.
quick recap and refresh our memories
And
on
hit
the
that like
history
button.
and abilities of this kaiju. This is important because by
I need a
doing
good
this,
rundown.
we'll
It's
have
been a while
very
since
good
I saw
idea
that
of
movie.
How this guy will fit into the Monsterverse. Destoroyah first appeared in the 1995 film Godzilla vs. Destoroyah, the last of the Heisei Godzilla series. But it didn't always
Heisei.
look
I've
like
always said
this.
Heisei.
Going back a few decades, in 1954, in the original Godzilla film, we witnessed the use of a weapon known as the Oxygen Destroyer, used to kill Godzilla in Tokyo Bay.
And that's what kind of did it, didn't it?
Was that in this precise location,
Yep.
ancient Precambrian
Started
crustaceans
mutating.
underwent mutations thanks to the effects of this weapon. The reason why Destoroyah wound up this big and resistant was due to the mutations it went through as the micro-oxygen from the Oxygen Destroyer integrated itself into this animal's biology.
It mutated my boy.
What makes
I mean,
this kaiju unique is the fact that this creature
that
comes
last
in many
version,
different
dude.
forms. This will be important to keep in mind once
Like,
we
how'd
start
it go from
talking
that
about
first
its
one to that
appearance
last
in the
one?
Monsterverse.
It's crazy.
The first form was its microform. After the micro-oxygen mutated this animal, these began evolving into a crawling form, feeding itself and eventually reaching sizes that would surpass humans and end up looking like pure nightmare fuel.
Nightmare
Unlike
for
the
sure.
other kaiju Godzilla had faced in the past, these creatures would come together and morph into what was known as an aggregate form. This and the previous forms were similar in that these animals looked very similar to a
Could you
walking
imagine if he
crustacean
kept
with
evolving?
many limbs, covered by a thick red-colored armor resistant to many firearms. It was at this stage, however, where a few kinks in its armor were beginning to be identified. It was identified that constant exposure to extreme temperatures, in combination with explosive force, would begin
See, that's what I tried to say to
compromising
somebody a
this
while
creature's
ago.
armor.
Extreme
This was
temperature
a
is his
weakness in the
weakness.
smaller
Doesn't matter if it's
juvenile
really cold,
forms,
doesn't matter if
and
it's
we'll
really
see in
hot.
a little bit that this would be a serious problem later.
I don't know.
The aggregate form
That's what
was
I
a
thought.
result of a supernatural phenomenon.
It could
where
vary,
these animals
maybe?
would combine themselves into a stronger and larger creature. This already sounds bad enough, but it gets worse. This aggregate form can morph into a flying creature, seemingly gliding through the air without relying on flapping its wings.
Oh, it was
to
Shimo
sustain
versus
itself in the
Destoroyah,
air.
that's what it was.
Destoroyah would, and for the final time, change its form yet again. This time turning into what was known as its perfect form.
Perfect
This one is
Destoroyah.
the only iteration of Destoroyah that stood on two
Perfect.
legs, and one that seemingly developed a
Is that from
full
Gigabash? What is that
and
from?
exoskeleton.
Oh, no, that's from,
It is here where it would begin
forgot the
causing
Godzilla
some
game.
real serious trouble to Godzilla.
Don't know why I can't remember
And
its
if
name.
this form were to be translated into the Monsterverse, it would be even worse. The original perfect form of Destoroyah stood a whopping 120 meters in height. That
And
is
it's
around
cool.
the same height
You
as
can't deny
legendary
that it's a
Godzilla
cool
in
character, cool
2019 and
kaiju in general.
beyond. Compared to
Even if you
Godzilla
don't like
in
the
the
evil.
film, we're talking about almost a 66-foot
Burning
difference.
G, my
Destoroyah
favorite.
was equipped with robust arms with 3 claws oriented in a way that
I need to
it
watch
could
this
hold
movie
an
again. It's
opponent
been so
or
long.
clench these together to serve as piercing weapons. Its hallmark frill is
They need to
present among
remake
most
it,
of its
dude.
different forms,
Imagine.
with a prominent horn in the center of its
They
head.
remastered it?
Wingspan-wise, we're talking about 210 meters. That is 689 feet.
It's a big boy.
Equally as intimidating, the Destroyer had a very long tail, present in most of its forms, but most lethal in its flying and perfect forms. Tipped with a pincer-like appendage that could hold and drag opposing kaiju, and equipped with
Bro,
energy
I
absorbing
need
properties that would
Destroyer
drain energy from
in the
its opponent.
Monsterverse in
Now
my
that
life.
we're talking about weapons, we'll
Has
go
to
ahead
happen.
and highlight a few that will probably make a transition to a Monsterverse version of Destroyer in some way or form. Beginning with its Oxygen Blast,
What
which
even was
present in
that?
the juvenile, aggregate, flying, and perfect forms. This blast was described as having the power of the Oxygen Destroyer that ended up killing Godzilla. Earlier in the film, in
I'd
a live interview,
pretty
Dr.
solid.
Ewan did mention that this stuff was powerful enough to penetrate metal, meaning that this could be used as a world-ending weapon. A fun-sized version of this destructive force was present in these smaller crustaceans, but as Destoroyah began reaching larger sizes, this weapon began to show signs of being much more powerful. Destoroyah, in its aggregate form, was able to inflict a fatal wound to Godzilla Jr., injecting this destructive matter inside its body, causing him to foam in the mouth and suffocate. This micro-oxygen served another purpose, a way to send up bits of DNA into Destoroyah's system. Yeah, that's right, Destoroyah can absorb DNA from other kaiju. This act allowed Destoroyah to then be able to evolve once more and develop an endoskeleton and a posture with similar limb arrangement to its opponent Godzilla. Its horn and frill didn't go anywhere. This thing in particular proved to be a lethal weapon.
Savage.
Known as a variable slicer, this thing would be supercharged with energy and as a result able to inflict more damage, cutting right through Godzilla's thick armor. This energy flux inside the horn itself would then act as a sharpening agent, enabling this horn to pierce the thickest of armor. But perhaps the most
such a cool
kaiju.
Let me know in the comments what your all's favorite kaiju is.
Before this, Godzilla
it could be villain, it could be a good guy.
Well, but not so much as the monster in this film. One who clearly enjoyed taking its time in the act of killing and knew exactly what it was doing. Destoroyah, apart from looking like a demon, quite literally
does look like a demon.
Like one. This was the last and only time Destoroyah appeared in a film. It did appear in video games and comics, but not
We need him in another movie.
But
please!
What if it did appear in the Monsterverse? Does this cinematic universe set the stage for the return of this monster?
Please!
The answer is a solid yes. The directors of Godzilla King of the Monsters saw fit to reintroduce another element present in the classic Godzilla films, the introduction of the Oxygen Destroyer. Put very simply, the way this weapon works is basically like this. A bomb filled with chemical compounds would be detonated in the waters where the target would be at.
And there's going to be a crab down there, right?
A chemical reaction would remove the
He's been evolving this whole time, years and years.
Environment that is lethal to all living organisms. This can also lead to cellular destruction and imminent death in the creature affected by it. So, since we already have an Oxygen Destroyer detonation happening in the Monsterverse timeline, we would have a good excuse for some ancient life form who happened to be in the way of this blast to one day evolve to become the new Destoroyah. But who knows?
Oh my gosh, I'm excited.
This creature already exists in this timeline. From this point on, the remainder of this episode is 100%
speculation. It's not true, it's not facts. We're just, speculating.
After all, you're all here to see
excited
a what-if
anyways.
scenario.
It's a what-if scenario, exactly.
Let's talk about where Destoroyah might be in the Monsterverse. Our speculative Destoroyah timeline will begin in 2019 in Isla de Mara off the coast of Mexico.
Where that bomb was dropped?
After the detonation of the Oxygen Destroyer, several Precambrian crustaceans made contact with this chemical reaction. The origin of these in the Monsterverse could be
It's going to be so cool, man.
Some may have just been already present in the surrounding strata, or to make things more interesting, these may have made their way to the surface from a near hollow Earth vortex, a place where many creatures resembling prehistoric organisms can swim up from.
True.
Once making contact with this chemical reaction, these crustaceans would have mutated over time. Come the events of GXK and the discovery of even more titans. Monarch would at this point still be oblivious to the existence of these constantly mutating organisms. With each passing day, these small creatures begin evolving, reproducing themselves mutation after mutation. If you recall from the 1995 film, the power of micro-oxygen was wielded not just by the latter forms of Destoroyah, but also the smaller forms. And since we already established that Destoroyah is able to absorb DNA from its victims and integrate characteristics of its prey into itself, it's likely that Destoroyah would attain characteristics of other classes of animals. At some point during the Monsterverse timeline,
this guy's going through Jared Modena? I need to check him out. He's going through the evolution.
Prey big enough to catch the attention of humans. The findings
what they would look like in today's movies.
And consistent types of wounds on prey animals will eventually catch the attention of Monarch, who will eventually connect the dots and begin the search of whatever it is that is killing these animals. At this size, the crustaceans would be large enough to cause damage to larger life forms.
They just be bodying everything in the ocean.
It was at this point when these creatures began making contact with humans. If Destoroyah ever makes it into the big screen in this franchise, our best guess is that they wouldn't skimp on the opportunity to make these monsters interact with humans face to face at a more personal level.
Oh, yeah.
At this point, the micro-oxygen blast of these animals would be strong enough to mortally wound humans
R.I.P.
in an instant. Bulletproof and numerous, a horde of these crustaceans from would be nothing short of a horrific thing to witness. Monarch would have collected enough samples at this point to figure out where these things came from and whose fault it was. Humans.
Of
More
course.
specifically,
It's
the
always
United
our
States
fault.
military. This
Come on now.
oxygen destroyer would once again bite humanity in the
Of
after
course,
a few
of
decades.
course.
And
Few
given that
decades, and
these
we've got
creatures
this
seem
big
to have
fella.
a mind of their own and a special affinity to destroying things and becoming bigger and more powerful, someone else will begin to take note of this growing threat.
Godzilla.
Destoroyah
See, right
is
now
one of
he's
the very
evolved
few
Godzilla.
examples of kaiju who didn't rely on
Or he was.
radiation to mutate and become a monster
Maybe he
of
gets
massive
stronger?
proportions. It only seemed to have relied on rapid evolutionary forces and the implementation of micro-oxygen. If this was still the
Burning,
case in the
evolved
Monsterverse,
thermo
Destoroyah's
Godzilla.
only
That's
means
what we
of
need.
becoming more powerful wouldn't be targeting nuclear power plants like Scylla or the G-Man, but rather targeting other large monsters to then absorb their energy, DNA, and then becoming more powerful. And the other most powerful creatures in this universe at this point in time would be the Alpha Titans.
They're gonna get
such as
dug.
Kong, Shimo, Mothra, and Godzilla himself. In the eyes of Destoroyah, these titans, amongst other powerful titans like Rodan, for instance, would be seen as a buffet instead of just another form of opposition. Admittedly, the Monsterverse rendition of Destoroyah would still welcome radioactive energy with open arms. Before we talk about how powerful Destoroyah could be in this universe, let's quickly talk about how Destoroyah would look in the Monsterverse.
That's what I want to know.
The first thing that comes to
What's he
mind
gonna
is
look like?
size. And this thing in this universe
Size,
would be nothing
texture,
short
detail,
of
I need
massive.
all of it.
We aren't here to predict exactly
need
how big,
some
but for
amazing
fun,
detail in
let's
this
use
character.
the size comparison between Destoroyah and Godzilla in the 1995 film. If we use the same size difference ratio seen in this movie, this means that
95.
proportionally speaking,
We're due.
we are looking at a Destoroyah that is around
We're almost 30 years due.
471 feet in height. This isn't taller than an upright Shimo or Ghidorah. Size in this case isn't the most dangerous characteristic of this monster. More on this in a little bit. Now to physical characteristics. In this more grounded and realistic take on a kaiju universe, design-wise, some of the physical traits of Destoroyah's final
They do good
perfect
with
form
designs as of
won't
recent,
really
so I
hold
think
up
it would
in the
be crazy.
Monsterverse. That said, the overall designs of the crawl, juvenile, aggregate, and even the
I mean, ever
flying
since
form hold up
2000,
kind of
the
well
designs
by
have been
today's
really good.
design standards. With a bit of tweaking, the flying form of Destoroyah would still look pretty good in a Monsterverse film. It's the perfect form that will need some work. Why? Well, if you remember, Destoroyah's perfect form was also capable of flight. The problem here is that an animal this bulky, with especially thick legs, would have a very hard time flying with wings this small.
I mean, that's
To
true,
raise
but
an
it's
animal
Destoroyah.
like this into
Let it
the air
happen.
requires massive amounts of force.
We know
This
it's not
requires
real.
stronger
I
muscles
just need
and
him.
larger
I just need
wings.
him in the movie.
There are many talented artists online who already took a stab at making a Monsterverse version of Destoroyah. Some
him
of these
bigger
include
wings?
those made by Jared Medina or Sangoon, or updated versions of the Destroyer kaiju that would fit well with the Monsterverse's
Bro.
monster aesthetics. One common
Could
characteristic
you
of
imagine?
these newer artist renditions is the incrementing of the wing's surface area. Some, such as this
So
one, even
crazy,
went as
man.
far as reducing the mass of the legs and increasing the muscle mass on the chest and back, as to give more power to the wings that will aid in flight. In general,
That
a
makes sense.
Destoroyah would have to follow these design choices for it to be able to fly realistically, more or less. Larger chest and back muscles to provide enough
I
muscle
don't really
power
care
to
about the
sustain
realistic
flight,
aspect
a
of it, you know
larger
what I'm
set of
saying? I
wings
know
to
these
provide
movies
enough
aren't
surface
real.
area to push sufficient air
So, like,
downwards
put
to
'em
then
in there,
allow
I'm
the
happy.
body to levitate.
Make 'em look good,
Lightweight,
and
but
I'll still be happy.
extremely resistant chitinous armor, not too heavy to make this creature exert too much energy while flying, and reduced mass on its legs as compared to its
Crazy.
original form in 1995. These attributes are a good starting point to make Destoroyah
I mean, that looks sick, though.
comfortably fit
Like-
in the design choices of other Monsterverse
That looks so
kaiju.
cool.
As we can see, Destoroyah, if it does indeed match these parameters, would be an absolute unit of a monster.
He will be a
Unmatched
unit,
in terms
bro.
of strength, and
I mean,
in
look
this
at the
case,
size.
even in power. In
Dude.
the Monsterverse, the only man-made weapon that came close to killing Godzilla was the
Let me know what you think in the
Oxygen
comments.
Destroyer.
I'm
This
hyped.
time, this power will be wielded by another, presumably larger and more powerful monster. The ability to shoot micro-oxygen blasts still holds up in this universe. This would be a blast that would burn and cut. And for the first time in the Monsterverse, we may actually see Godzilla suffer from many numerous cuts, gashes, and nasty lacerations on its body.
Yeah.
If Godzilla does indeed survive this fight,
They'd be in
these
for a
types
battle,
of
bro.
wounds would inflict scars that would last a lifetime.
We need at
And
least
that's
2
on
movies
the
out of
heavily
Destoroyah, though.
armored
It can't
Godzilla.
be a one
Any
movie
other
thing and
weaker
Destoroyah's
kaiju
gone.
would have suffered a
I've got to
great
get 2
fate.
movies out of him.
Speaking of gore-inflicting weapons,
Like he wins the first time, and then they, you know, beat him the second time or something.
In this cinematic universe,
I need 2
having
movies.
a superheated knife in the middle of its forehead and used correctly, Destoroyah would have yet another weapon that could easily dispatch any lesser kaiju with a single stab. Its tail would have been the most powerful we've seen, potentially much longer than that of Godzilla's, or around the same size as Shimo's.
He's gonna
This
be a
tail would not
savage,
only
any
have
way you look
impact
at it.
forces
It's gonna be
capable of
sick.
killing with a well-placed hit.
I'm just
but
hoping it
also
actually
grab
happens.
And hold an opposing titan, strangling it and absorbing its energy. As Destoroyah continuously evolves with each form stronger than the previous, it will probably take a team effort of titans to take down this monster.
For sure.
That said, here at Goji Center, we do think that adding Destoroyah to the roster of Monsterverse kaiju is a must. But it's too early. Destoroyah is the type of titan that should be saved for the end game.
That's
It's
true.
simply too
But that's why I said
powerful.
2. We need
This
2 movies
showdown
out of it, at
between
least.
Destoroyah and Godzilla will require an alpha titan at his best, most powerful form not seen yet. Currently in the Monsterverse timeline, Destoroyah may already be lurking the seas as a microbe or a frightening man-eating crustacean, waiting for the right
He's
moment
there.
to strike.
He's just evolving. And when he's at his full evolution, maybe even not even his full one, we're probably gonna see him in the movies. Maybe they start putting him in at like the end of the more recent Godzilla movies when we get to see him. I'm excited. That's all I've got to say. I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for watching with me. I love ya. Goodbye.